Thank you both for joining us this morning and for your willingness to serve the greatest part of the state of Colorado, the Western Slope. Before we begin, we'd like to go over some of the ground rules. Candidates should focus on ideas, not personalities. Candidates should be courteous and should not make inflammatory statements, disrespectful or attacking speech, or profane language. None of that will be tolerated. Candidates may not display a prop of any kind. Candidates must strictly adhere to the time limits of each section of the debate. The moderator reserves the right to cut off a candidate who exceeds the time limit or to redirect a candidate if the remarks are not pertinent to the elected office. Do you both agree to these rules?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Additionally, we ask that all audience members exhibit professional decorum during these debates. Limited applause is allowed, but unruly outbursts or disruptions are prohibited. And the debate moderator may penalize the candidate's time if their supporters are unable to maintain decorum. Audience members should also be aware that these debates will be filmed and live streamed for public viewing. A coin toss was conducted backstage, and candidate McCluskey has chosen to begin opening remarks. Julie, you have 2 minutes for opening remarks.
Good morning. I'm State Representative Julie McCluskey, and I'm running for re-election in House District 13. I'm born and raised in Colorado, and I've lived 21 years in Summit County with my family. And I often use the hashtag #LoveWhereYouLive when I talk about my adventures in life in Colorado. I want working families and people in this state to have that same great chance at their own Colorado dream. That's why, since being elected and now serving as the chair of the Joint Budget Committee, I've focused on the affordability of healthcare, housing, and childcare in the Western Slope in our rural resort communities. In 2019, I passed the reinsurance bill, a bill that has brought down health insurance premiums on the individual marketplace by 36% on the Western Slope. I'm proud to say that I supported $428 million in affordable housing efforts, including $90 million earmarked for rural and rural resort communities. We've supported young families by making sure that we provide millions for childcare facilities during the pandemic. I voted to support free full-day kindergarten and have helped pave the way for universal preschool. I'm particularly proud that I carried the School Finance Act, putting an historic investment to our public schools, making sure that teachers are on the path to earn a living wage in the communities where they live. I'm also excited to say that this year, in a bipartisan way, we have lowered property taxes for homeowners and businesses alike. Livability on the Western Slope is more than just affordability. It's also protecting our beautiful environments. That's why I have championed legislation for wildfire mitigation, prevention, and investing in Colorado's water plan and infrastructure. Experience matters. Please vote for Julie McCluskey, House District 13.
Thank you, Julie. David, you have 2 minutes for opening comments.
What a journey this has been. I have met the most extraordinary people in Colorado, District 13, and I have to tell you, having people give their trust, belief, and hope in supporting me is really a humbling experience, and it's one that I don't take for granted. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to represent House District 13. My name is David Buckley. I live in Kremling, Colorado, in Grand County. I own a small business there in Kremling, and I work for Grand County Road and Bridge as a heavy equipment operator. Prior to that, I was a part owner with my high school buddy in a franchise business where we were the largest franchise for that brand in the state of Colorado until 2020, where we were impacted by the lockdowns, mandates, like a lot of other businesses. We lost 47% of our revenue, forcing me to seek other employment, which I did. Prior to that, I spent 30 years working in healthcare and transportation. I grew up in Golden, and I am very excited to be here. I have over 30 years' experience in leadership. I am looking to bring leadership to the Colorado government to help get our economy under control, get crime under control, get our kids focused back on their education and exceeding. I'm excited to be here, and vote for me, David Buckley, for District 13. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We will now move into the question and answer portion of the debate. Each candidate will be asked to respond to 4 questions that have been submitted by Club 20 members and our partners. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question. The candidate who goes first on each question will also have an opportunity to offer a 30-second rebuttal to the other candidate's response for that particular question. The candidate that went first in opening remarks will offer the first response to the first question. Question 1 will go to Julie, then we'll go to David, then we'll bring it back to Julie. So question 1, the district you hope to represent includes communities that share many similarities, but also have significant differences in demographics, economic drivers, transportation needs, and other areas. Given these differences, how do you propose to best represent the diverse constituencies in this district? Julie?
Thank you. I will start by saying that when you live on the Western Slope, you share many of the same values across counties. In my time in office, I have represented ski resorts, agricultural industry, farmers, ranchers, teachers, nurses, and police officers. It is so important as an elected official that we take the time to listen and learn from those that we are serving. I'm very proud in the years that I have been down at the state capitol that I have taken the time to meet with constituents, to meet with stakeholders, to meet with experts to talk about the legislation we're bringing forward. It's important that not one particular viewpoint is furthered at the expense of another. Of the 507 bills that were signed into law this year, I carried 67. Those were bipartisan bills with Republican and Democrat support. I am proud to continue that record and work with everyone across the aisle.
Thank you, Julie. David, same question. I'll repeat it. The district you hope to represent includes communities that share many similarities, but also have significant differences in demographics, economic drivers, transportation needs, and other areas. Given these differences, how do you propose to best represent the diverse constituencies of this district?
How I best represent them is talking to them, listening to them, and acting on what they're talking about. We have a lot of commonality in District 13. When you think of District 13, it's the heart of Colorado. It's mountains, it's skiing, it's recreation, it's ranching. That is common through all 6 counties in the district. What they're telling me, we want roads improved, we want affordability, we want our water and our lands preserved. That is a common message that I'm hearing. And from businesses, they want government out. They want to be able to manage their own business in the best way they see fit. That's what I'm hearing from District 13, and that's what I plan to do to represent them.
Thank you, David. Julie, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. You know, I just spent some time out at Pass Creek Ranch, a ranch in the lower Blue River in Summit County, and talking with the owner there. You know, it was clear that while he was passionate about conservation and dealing with climate change, he was also clinging to the traditions of his ranch and the beautiful and majestic environment that he was in. As we talked about some of the needs, affordable housing, our need to invest more in healthcare in the high country, you know, he had some wise words that I'll have to save for another time.
Thanks, Julie. Appreciate that. All right, question number 2. David, we're coming to you first. What can or should the state legislature do to ensure affordable, accessible, and effective health care for Coloradians?
Well, let me tell you, working in healthcare for 30 years, I hear Representative McCluskey talk about the 36% savings. Let me tell you, working with actuaries and underwriters, when you're lowering premiums, you're either losing benefits or you're paying a higher deductible. So in other words, you're not having insurance. What we need to do is get government to take more of a back seat to healthcare because they really don't have the ability to manage it. They don't understand the ins and outs of what happens with underwriting and how that all comes out with pricing. It's all pooled base. That's how health insurance works. And don't make the mistake that health insurance and healthcare are the same. They're not. Okay? So that's a big mistake that people make. One of the things that we need to do is let the experts manage healthcare.
Thank you, David. Julie, the same question. I shall repeat it. What can or should the state legislature do to ensure affordable, accessible, and effective health care for Coloradians?
The I-70 corridor and the Arkansas Valley have the highest uninsured rates in this state. When we passed reinsurance in 2019, it was to try and drive more people into the insurance marketplace, to try and cover more lives so that all could receive the benefit of additional coverage. As of 2021, 19% of Coloradans on Medicaid increased up to 25%. I'm extremely proud by the steps that the legislature has taken with reinsurance to bring health insurance prices down on the individual marketplace. We do that by driving revenue in, not by increasing deductibles, not by increasing premiums. I'm also proud of the healthcare preceptors tax credit that I passed this year to make sure that young students pursuing a degree in healthcare will have that opportunity in rural Colorado. Healthcare is complicated. I've talked to a number of you about it. I know it's tough, but we have to keep leaning in and doing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. David, you have 30 seconds to respond.
I agree with you. Healthcare is tough, which is why I think the government needs to stay out of it. Government already has Medicare and Medicaid as government healthcare programs. I've worked in those programs. There's a medical transportation benefit associated to those programs. I see the corruption. I see the unintentional and the intentional corruption. The government doesn't have the ability to manage these programs, and the bigger it gets, the more complex it becomes.
Thank you, Sarah. Question number 3. Julie, we're going to start with you. Technology and public policies are accelerating in a variety of transitions throughout Western Colorado. Technology and public policies are accelerating a variety of transitions throughout Western Colorado communities. What is your plan to ensure all West Slope communities become economically resilient and continue to thrive into the future?
If we focus on the ability to access information, our daily lives, our daily jobs, we have to talk about broadband first in rural Colorado. I'm pleased to say $162 million is coming from ARPA funds to help expand broadband access. Even more, between $500 and $900 million is coming from the Infrastructure Jobs Act that was passed at the federal level. High-speed internet is no longer a luxury, it is an economic necessity. And we've seen through the entire experience of COVID that having access to the broader global world is essential, not only to do our jobs, but to take advantage of healthcare, to learn in schools and in our colleges. As a legislator who has currently represented 5 counties on the Western Slope, the new counties I represent are even more dire in gaining access. I will continue to fight for more broadband access on the Western Slope.
Thank you, ma'am. David, same question. Question number 3. Technology and public policies are accelerating a variety of transitions throughout Western Colorado communities. What is your plan to ensure all West Slope communities become economically resilient and continue to thrive into the future?
How about we start in Kremling? Because we're struggling there with it. That's where I live, and I can't even do Zoom calls in a very effective manner. So yes, I agree that that's an essential part of our development here on the Western Slope. We need to have that. My mother worked for Level 3, which is now CenturyLink. I have some insight to how that all needs to happen and how that all needs to impact the Western Slope. 100% for it. We need it. It's essential. We got to have it.
Julie, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you. I should expand and talk not only about broadband, but what broadband brings. As part of my time in the legislature with my colleagues, we have been able to further telehealth. We've been able to see students actively learn from their home settings. College students live in any part of this state and access a full curriculum. Technology is only part of what we are talking about when we talk about broadband. Thank you.
Thank you. David, next question is to you, and yeah, everybody, we got another water question. So, David, what do you see as the legislature's role in addressing the shortage on the Colorado River?
I see the role as keeping as much as we possibly can. Water is essential for life, and all water in Colorado flows out. So we have to figure out ways to store more of it, and I know that's already happening. When you talk to local governments, especially in Grand County, where I live, it's the headwaters of the Colorado River. Lake County is the headwater of the Arkansas River, two of the major rivers here in the Colorado. We have got to do everything possible to preserve our water rights here, and that is exactly what I plan to do.
Thank you, sir. Julie, same question. What do you see as legislature's role in addressing the shortage on the Colorado River?
It wouldn't be a Club 20 debate without that question.
You bet.
Our current state of water in Colorado is certainly dire, and living so near to the headwaters, it is a daily conversation for us in our communities. You know, our water situation is the culmination of 23 years of drought, of a supply-demand gap that continues to grow, of a failure by the lower basin states to properly conserve. And now when we are at this moment, when the Bureau of Reclamation has demanded that we take action, I believe that's exactly what the legislature needs to do. I've told many people I believe water will be the centerpiece of our agenda this next session. Whether it's talking about investments in Colorado's water plan and infrastructure, whether it's talking about new technologies that help us better monitor the loss of water, the use of water, whether it's talking about how we truly incentivize our agricultural sector in a fair and just way to be able to conserve more water, use less water. That is what we will be talking about.
David, you have 30 seconds.
When it comes to water, we got to start thinking a little bit outside the box, all right? You know, storage is absolutely essential, but when you look at the Midwest and the East Coast, where we're getting an abundance of water, people are flooding, there's damage happening, there has to be a way to ship that water from that parts of the country to here where we need it. We need to start looking at different ways to do that. If we can ship oil and all of that, we can certainly ship water. And so those are the things that we need to look at as thinking outside the box with this critical issue.
Thank you, sir. We'll now move into the cross-examination portion of this debate. Each candidate will be given 4 minutes to ask questions of their opponent on matters pertinent to the race or office. Please be reminded that question should be pertinent to the office you are running for and should not include any attacking speech or profane language. I reserve the right to redirect a candidate if their remarks are not pertinent to the elected office. Candidate McCluskey, begin the cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Buckley, in a recent article in the Sky High News, you were quoted as saying that your opponent, myself, hasn't supported any legislation to help agriculture, but my record is different. I have co-sponsored legislation that has put $30 million from farm-to-market infrastructure grants, $25 million for the National Western Stock Show, $5 million for the State Fair, millions for our Colorado Proud program, and created a drought climate resiliency office in the Department of Ag. If you are elected, what are your specific policy ideas to support agriculture?
Before I answer that question, let me just point out that on Senate Bill 21087, the ag labor rights, you voted yes for that, which was not a support of the ag industry. How I plan to support the ag industry, I was a rancher. I own cattle. I know what it takes. We've got what it takes to get the livestock raised. what farming includes.
Mr. Buckley, I appreciate your background, but what specific policy ideas would you bring forward?
Start with water. How about that? Let's start with water. Let's preserve as much as we can. We need it both for farming and for livestock.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. I want to emphasize that you have talked about funding public schools. I have driven $90 million through Proposition EE to fund rural schools specifically, and have been a champion of better funding for our public schools over my time in office. What would your policy plan be for better funding in rural schools?
Let's start with paying off the budget stabilization factor that for some reason the Colorado government seems to stall.
And to do that, Mr. Buckley, it's $321 million. Where would you take that money?
From wherever we can to pay off that debt. That's what budgeting is all about. Pay your debts off first.
Would you take it from those who are currently enrolled in Medicaid, the largest part of our budget, the budget that supports health care for low-income individuals in this state?
I'm sure there's a variety of sources we can take money from. That's what you're doing now. You're stealing Peter to pay Paul. But we need to start by paying off those debts. Let me remind you, in 2000, Colorado voters passed Amendment 23.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. That was not my question. I also want to talk about housing. You have talked about it being a priority of yours. We have supported $428 million in affordable housing projects and have driven $90 million to rural Colorado. Last year, I carried a bill that helped incentivize local communities, particularly in rural Colorado, to do workforce and affordable housing development. 45 counties and municipalities are now taking advantage of those grant dollars. What is your specific policy to address housing needs in Colorado?
Guess what? All those initiatives aren't helping because it's still an issue. Part of what they're doing with this affordable housing is passing these green initiatives. What I want to do is work with developers to just get affordable housing in without all these stipulations and regulations.
The bill that I passed last year was designed to incentivize those developers, and it is. We are launching housing projects in 45 counties and municipalities. Finally, Mr. Buckley, please explain your position regarding reproductive health care. Under what circumstances do you think abortion should be legal?
It's already legal in Colorado.
Under what circumstances do you believe abortion should be legal?
It's already legal in Colorado.
Mr. Buckley, do you have an opinion on reproductive health care for women?
In order to have an opinion, you have to have a perspective. In order to have perspective, you have to have experience. I have never been pregnant, nor do I ever plan to be pregnant.
I'm sorry you didn't answer the question.
Okay, thank you all. We're going to move into the second half of cross-examination. Candidate Buckley, you have 4 minutes to ask questions of Representative McCluskey.
Representative McCluskey, I came across this campaign mailer yesterday from you, and I've read through these points here that you're going to do. One of them is taking credit for delivering checks for $715 and $1,500 for families. Let me ask you this. Do you support TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights?
Mr. Buckley, I do not support TABOR. However, I do support getting people their refund checks as quickly as possible. Democrats led the charge, knowing that there was an amount of money above the cap and that TABOR refunds were due to people. We accelerated
Thank you very much.
those checks to
thank you, Representative
Coloradans.
McCluskey. What's contradictive to that statement is House Bill 19-1257, you voted yes to withhold getting those excessive dollars distributed to taxpayers. Moving on, you talk about here another contradiction of what you say you're going to do and how you voted. You're increasing funding for law enforcement to crack down on fentanyl dealers, but yet House Bill 22-1326, you voted to lower the dealing of fentanyl to a misdemeanor. How do you explain that?
Mr. Buckley, it's unfortunate you didn't look at my record and how I voted on the amendments for that bill. I'm very proud of the fentanyl bill that we passed this year. It's investing millions of dollars in education, prevention, and treatment. And yes, The penalties are harder for those that are dealing, and the penalties for
Thank
those
you very
with
much,
possession.
Representative. Thank you. Another quick question for you, Representative. Have you ever owned a business?
My husband is a small business owner.
All right. Have you ever owned a business?
I have not.
Okay. Do you foresee a time here in the future where the Colorado government will close businesses again?
Mr. Buckley, if you're addressing to the COVID pandemic, I'm extremely proud of how well Colorado addressed what was a public health crisis. We are 11th in the nation with the fewest COVID deaths, and that's because we took swift action. We took action
Thank
in
you,
a moment when we
Representative.
did not
I appreciate your
understand.
perspective. So you've never owned a business, and that's obviously shows by what your actions were in Colorado government. Finally, have you ever owned livestock or owned a farm?
I have not.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. One other question, and I go back to this Senate Bill 21087 about the ag labor. You're saying that you're helping the ag community. How do you see supporting that bill helping the ag community?
Senate Bill 21087 was a support bill for those who are working in the ag industry. Farmers and ranchers work well with the people that are serving them and helping to bring in those crops or deal with the livestock. I'm very proud of the number of ranchers and farmers I talked to as that bill was being developed. We heard them. We made changes to that bill to improve it. And let's not forget,
You didn't hear them all.
those
but thank you
working
for that
on those
answer,
farmers
Representative.
and ranchers.
Thank you for that answer. No further questions, Your Honor.
Dang, I feel important. Okay, so we're now going to move into the closing remarks aspect of this debate. Each candidate now has 2 minutes to present closing remarks. Candidate McCluskey, you have the floor.
Thank you. I want to first thank Club 20 for continuing to promote civil discourse. I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Murphy, Mr. Buckley, for the conversation today, and I want to lift up my colleagues and candidates in the audience today for participating in this important conversation. You know, we're still recovering from a pandemic and an economic shakeup as we face high inflation, as we continue to deal with global supply chain issues. It is important that we elect leaders who have experience, who have been working down at the Capitol to protect the hopes and dreams of our working families and working people. Experience matters and leadership matters. In my time in office, I've served on the Education Committee, the Rural Affairs and Agricultural Committee. I've worked on Wildfire Matters. I've worked on the Early Childhood and School Readiness Committee, and right now I chair the School Finance and Joint Budget Committees. I'm extremely proud of my record to support families, to support people on the Western Slope, including ranchers and farmers and the people that work for those ranches and farms. I'm very proud of my position on public safety, the steps that we took to make sure that we were getting fentanyl off the streets and dealing with those who have addiction problems. I know there is no one right answer to the challenges we face, and that is why I work hand in hand with Republicans and Democrats to make sure that that bipartisan perspective is reflected not only in my legislation, but also in my decision-making as the chair of the Joint Budget Committee. I believe in listening and learning. That's why I've been knocking on hundreds of doors in the 4 new counties in House District 13, along with those that I currently represent. I love where I live. I want to make sure that everybody in Colorado feels the same way. Vote for Julie McCluskey, House District 13.
David.
I want to, sorry.
Please.
I wanted to follow Representative McCluskey's thank you to Club 20 for all of you, the other candidates. This is a great process. This is my first time experiencing it. Phenomenal, and I appreciate it. There's a significant fundamental difference between myself and Representative McCluskey, and it really comes down to this. Representative McCluskey is all about bigger government, bigger spending, bigger regulations, bigger mandates. That's what she's been doing the last 4 years. And what has it got us? We're having inflation right now that's killing us. Crime is out of control. Colorado's the top in many of these crime categories. Our children are behind in education. And our agriculture and our businesses are being overregulated to death. She has had her opportunity. She has done what she believes is right, but it's killing us at the same time. I've spent 30 years of leadership. I've brought diverse crowds together, workforces together, to achieve common goals that they thought once was impossible. And I can't tell you what that means when you see people achieve things they never thought that they could. That's what I'm planning on bringing to Colorado government, that leadership, to get our economy back on track, to get crime under control, to get our children educated so they are prepared for their futures, and get our ag and small businesses off of these excessive regulations and let them have the ability to thrive on their own. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Vote for David Buckley for House District 13. Thank you.
On behalf of Club 20, I would like to thank both the candidates, Julie, David, very well done. We appreciate your passion for Western Colorado. Thank you.